If you applied for the IBMS registration portfolio and are struggling to write evidences, this video is for you. Hi, my name's Abdul and I'm a fully qualified biomedical scientist. I did my portfolio a few years ago and also struggled on how to write evidences for my portfolio. I wasn't really sure where to start or what I should even do or write about. So I thought I'd create this sort of mini series for you guys to help you write your evidences and submit good quality pieces. So I'm going to start off with the first module, personal responsibility and development. So what do the IBMS want you to do? So there's a series of mandatory evidences that you have to do for each module. And for this one, they ask you to write a personal statement that demonstrates your understanding of the limits of your practice and how you act accordingly. So we're going to go through this and talk about how we can actually go about writing this piece of evidence and break it down step by step. So before we start to think about how we write it, there are certain SOPs which I'm sure you'll have already known. The SOPs stand for standards of proficiency, and there are three that the IBMS have mapped to the first piece of evidence, and it's 4.1. So it is to recognize that you are personally responsible and must be able to justify their decisions and actions. Second one is exercise personal initiative. Lastly is understand the value of reflective practice and the need to record the outcome of such reflection to support continuous improvement. So I've highlighted the sort of key words that spoke out to me when reading this. So we're going to write our evidences to try and target these points here. So from what I've gathered about this module, it's not just about what you've done. It's about your reflection and also showing the assessor that you understand your limits as a biomedical scientist in training. So these are the things that we're going to focus on when writing our evidences. It'll be showing reflection and sort of our limits as a biomedical scientist during our training. So to build our evidences, we need certain tools. So already you should be thinking about what you've done during your training that shows that you came across something that you weren't too sure about, or you weren't too sure about, or you weren't sure on how to handle a certain situation or task that you were given. And these are the certain tools that I thought would be good to mention. So you got your autonomous versus supervised tasks. So what you can do on your own versus what you need to be supervised at the same time whilst doing. Also, you can use training logs to help demonstrate this. So you can talk about any sort of evidences such as competencies. Those are really good ones. You can include or talk about that in your evidence. Again, your sort of training program. So did you have to shadow someone whilst doing a certain task? Or was there a specific online training that you had to do? And also your reflection. So that's something that you need to include in your evidence. Talk about why it was important that you recognize that you are at the limit of your practice, or why it's important to not go beyond and do something you're not too sure about. And also to reflect on the quality of training that you've been given. That's something you could also talk about as well. So this is another point as well, another tool that you can use to help build your evidence. So you can think about one time where you had to ask for help. So it could be literally anything that you weren't too sure about doing when performing a certain technique, or when you came across a sample that didn't look quite right. So yeah, these are the tools that I would recommend you kind of gather or gain to write this evidence here. So now we've got our tools, it comes to building the actual personal statement. So I thought about separating it into three main categories. You could have like an introduction, and what the introduction will include or can include is you can briefly describe your training journey. So you can talk about like how it was started. Were you assigned a certain trainer? Did you have like a plan on how to do a certain task? And so you can talk about that in your introduction. So did you have to shadow someone, or was it a case of seeing someone do a technique, then you perform it, and then you get assessed afterwards later. So talk about that in your introduction. So mention a few examples of what you can do independently. So something that you can do on your own pretty quickly, and also the more highly skilled tasks, what you need to do supervised. You can also talk about your competencies and how you have to get that signed off the more training you've been given. And then we can get into the main body. So in this will be sort of the bulk of your personal statement and what you should talk about. And I think it would be best to talk about one scenario where you reach the limit of your practice. So where you reach the limit of your practice, and explain it in detail as well. So really go into what happened. I'd quite like to use the STAR technique, which stands for situation. So this is the STAR technique. So this stands for situation, task, action, and result. So what was the situation? What task was it? What did you have to do? What actions did you take? And the result. So what happened at the end of it? And once you've explained all of that in your main body, in your personal statement, you can finally end on the conclusion. And in this part, you're not going to add anything new. What you're going to do is you're going to reflect on the importance of the situation. So you're going to really talk about why it was important that you stopped doing what you were doing in that moment and seeked help or guidance from someone else. So this really demonstrates the SOP 10.1, where you reflected on what you did and how it's important to record what you did, and also the outcome. What could have been the impact of you potentially doing something you weren't too sure of, and why it was good that you seeked help. And then you can mention, it supports your continuous improvement. So you learned from that. So you didn't quite know what to do in the moment, you got help, and then you improved yourself. And that's where you can tie in the continuous improvement. So if we go back to our building the personal statement slide, mention the positives and negatives. So what what was good about you stopping, and what could have gone wrong if you carried on, and that will form your conclusion. So again, it's just to remind you, this slide, what the SOPs are asking you to do. So recognize that you're personally responsible for and must be able to justify your decisions and actions. I'll talk about this more, how you can hit that point in the example later on. Exercise personal initiative. So you've shown that you recognize this was an area that you weren't too sure or comfortable on, and you seeked guidance. That shows your initiative. And the value of reflective practice, again, we spoke about this. So what is an example that you can talk about? I thought of something that a lot of you will have done in the lab, whether you were an MLA or a trainee biomedical scientist. This is the most fundamental stage in a pathology lab, and it is booking in a patient sample. So when booking in, you need to first accept the sample. So you got the specimen pot, and you got the request form, and then you book it into your LIMS here. So then you just type in the patient details and you book that system in. But before you go into this stage, you need to check the details of the patient. So this is an example scenario. You've got a patient sample here. You got fake name, the NHS number, the date of birth, and then you got the request form that they're both sent together with. So in the request form, you'll probably notice there's a discrepancy. So fake name is spelt wrongly here. So it's N-A-M-E here and then N-A-I-M. But the rest of the details, they match. So these are fine, that's not fine. So what would you do in this situation? You come across this, you've had a bit of training when accepting specimens, you come across this sample and you're not quite sure what to do. You think it's fine because the date of birth and the NHS number both match, which are more accurate than a name. This could have been handwritten, and the spelling might not have been, or someone might have just misspelt the name. But let's say you took the initiative and you didn't process the specimen forward. Instead, you flagged it up and raised it to a senior. So you raise it to a senior, and then you get help basically, and you ask for what do you need to do. So here's an example of how you can write that scenario out in your portfolio. So this is just a bit of like a snippet of, you know, what you can write basically. So we'll go through it. So let's say you've done your introduction, you've spoke about your training program, how it was, what you needed to do, or what you had to do, such as filling in competencies, shadowing, getting a trainer, and practicing it. You've done all that. You've spoken about what you can do independently, what you can do supervised. So I'll go through here. So again, you've done all of this, and now you're into the main body. So this is it. Let's read it out together. For example, when I was accepting specimens to be received in the lab, I came across this case where there were inconsistent details between the sample tube and the request form. This was the first time I had encountered this. I realized this was beyond my limit, and at the time to handle on my own. So in this situation, I consulted my trainer for assistance. After I had identified this gap in my training, so I identified this gap, I was then shown by my trainer how to handle such cases. Although it was a small discrepancy that may have been a typo, the cost of switching two different patient samples can be life-threatening. I want to highlight this part again in red because that's quite important to mention, especially during the reflection. So therefore, I took the initiative. Again, this also I'm going to highlight extra again. So if we look back to our SOPs, which is, where is it? It's over here. So exercise and personal initiative, you know, getting that keyword in there makes it so easy for the assessor to have a look at your work and be like, yep, they've hit that SOP 4.5 straight away. So if we continue with our example, and stop the patient sample from being booked in, I justified this action due to the discrepant information that could cause a misdiagnosis. Again, this word justified my action is one of the SOPs, which is here, able to justify the decisions. So when you talk about why you did a certain thing, how you can justify the reason why you made that conscious decision to stop what you were doing and seek help is justified, because if you didn't do that, the patient sample would have gone ahead and could have potentially been someone else. So it might not have actually been an error, but because you thought that the spelling was just a typo or something, that patient got the wrong result and then they got the wrong diagnosis. So that's how you can justify your actions. So let's continue again. Since this, I am now able to correctly handle discrepant information. So what this part here is useful for is because it shows continuous improvement. So continuous improvement. And that is also one of the points here. So the outcome of such reflection to support continuous improvement. And that's why this sentence is really, really good, because you've shown that you've grown and developed yourself since that incident. So correctly handle discrepant information in the correct way and ensure patient safety is met. This is something that I want to really hit home with you guys, that you should mention everything that you do is for the patient safety or for the benefit of the patient. If you can mention that in your evidences, that'll be really, really solid. So keep that in your mind when writing your evidences, that, you know, all the modules that are that you have to write about, you can always fit in that the reason you're doing this in the best way, or you're doing this sort of thing effectively, is to ensure the patient gets their right result, diagnosis, and treatment. So always try and sprinkle that in your reflections. Right, so through this experience, I have shown personal initiative, again, that keyword initiative, by realizing that I am at my limit, seeked guidance, and developed my knowledge. Develop my knowledge. I continually reflect on this, So again, using that keyword continual reflection to make sure I follow the correct protocols, seek help and handle samples properly as I am personally responsible for the patient sample. Now this word or sentence is important because in the SOP 4.1, you've got the word they are personally responsible for their decisions and actions. So that's something that I've done, when I was doing my portfolio. I kind of referred to the SOPs and saw, okay, what sort of words are they using that they want me to demonstrate, and try and find if I can fit those in my evidences or in my reflections or pieces of text that I'm writing. So again, link it back to the sample results and diagnosis. That's something that's an easy win and something that you can always talk about. So now we've gone through this example, I want to talk about some common mistakes. So common mistakes that people make when writing this piece of evidence. So the first one is not linking to patient safety. So it's all well and good that you've mentioned how you've learned a new technique and improved yourself in the lab, but if you don't mention why you're doing this in terms of the patient safety, then it's not really going to complete that whole evidence nicely. So another mistake that people make is not referencing the SOPs. So it's something that you can do very easily. You can put in brackets, SOP 5.1 or 4. Whatever in at the end of a sentence, and that just makes it easier for the assessor to be confident in marking your evidences as right. Like to see that, for them to see the evidence, for them to see the SOPs next to the sentence that you've written, makes it really easy for them to be like, yeah, this person's hit the SOPs. Another mistake people make is perfecting evidences. So don't focus so much on trying to perfect your evidences, thinking that, oh, this scenario is not good enough, or, I can't talk about this. As long as you can evaluate the learning outcomes and what you did, and you can speak about the training development, you'll be fine. This also ties into another mistake that people make, is struggling to find a scenario. As trainee biomedical scientists or MLAs, you're constantly finding yourselves, learning something, or you've come across a situation where, you're not sure what you should do here. It's just a case of really sitting down and, thinking about what you do day to day. I know it can be quite hard when you're doing it in the moment, but I'm sure if you took some time, 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the end of the day, think about what you did that day and whether you had to escalate something to a senior or you weren't quite sure. So that's something that people or students I've found were struggling with. Another mistake is not showing the journey. So when you talk about a certain example or scenario, start from the start and conclude with a reflection on like what you learned from it or why it was important. So it's like telling a story almost. So explain the scenario and take the reader along with you. So step by step, literally, what happened, what did you do, who did you speak with, and the sort of steps that you took in resolving the error, or how you trained yourself, or you got someone to train you, how you resolved the error, or how you learned a new technique and what was the benefit of that, basically. So yeah, just take the reader along with you throughout a journey on your development, basically. And finally, another mistake that students make is not making it personal. So you're not talking, they talk kind of objectively, where say, oh, this was the situation, this is what you should do. It's the whole point of the portfolio is to show the assessor that it was you who was doing it. It's how you learned, how you felt at the time. And it's really like, it's kind of personal in that way. So really find or use language that uses, in the first person, and say how you did something or what you did or what you learned from it. So always use it in the first person format. So the last tips I sort of have for you guys is, show your reflection. I'll use a blue marker. So the last tips I have for you guys is to, show reflection, show what you learned and how you develop yourself as a biomedical scientist. Show how you've taken responsibility over a patient sample. you saw there was a mistake and you realize that you have a duty to ensure the sample is handled in the best way possible. Because at the end of the day, as a biomedical scientist, you are responsible for that patient. And take the initiative in your own development. So, you saw that there was a gap in your knowledge and you weren't quite sure on how to handle this specific scenario or situation. You took the initiative and seek guidance. And that ties into the last point, is understanding your limits. So with the training portfolio, they're not expecting you to be fully fledged biomedical scientists. They want to see, the flaws that you have and how you've developed yourself and improved on those flaws, and really learned new techniques and how to handle certain scenarios. Because at the end of the day, it's to demonstrate your journey as to becoming a biomedical scientist. The training program isn't for people who already know how to do things. It's to show the assessor your development. So yeah, those are my last tips. So that is the end of the video. I hope it's helped you and gave you an understanding of what is expected in your evidences. If you guys are interested, I do have a full guide available, and it'll be at the top link in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.